So if you've read chapter 1, you know that today we're going to talk about some basic concepts in statistics. So there are many topics covered in chapter 1. In class, we will talk about the most important concepts. And those are the concepts that I will be testing you in the exam. And I will be testing you heavily in homework. The concept, the few concepts that we don't discuss in class are less important and less practical for the scope of this class. So we save time from discussing those in class, and just by reading it from the textbook, you get enough knowledge and you will be able to do the homework and the exams. So that's a choice of what to talk about in class and what not to. Like anything we don't discuss in class are not of the highest priority. You just need to simply go over your textbook, then you will have no problem doing homework. But for things that we do discuss in class, please pay extra attention and make sure you understand all the details in what we discuss. So that ensures you do a good job in your homework and exams. So we want to start with the concept of what is statistics, right? And that's the whole topic of this class. It's a statistics class. So what do we do in statistics? So the term statistics can refer to numerical facts, right? So that means it needs to be a number, such as averages, medians, percentage, maximum, minimum, standard deviations, right? All those statistical concepts that helps us understand a variety of business and economic situations. So a few keywords here. One is numeric facts. So they need to be in numbers. And two, we want to use these numbers to understand the real world situation. Like I mentioned in the first week, learning statistics is almost like learning a different language. We use very specific terms and words in statistics. So it takes some effort to translate between statistics and plain English. Similar as you translate between English and Chinese, between English and Spanish, it's similar. It's a translation between statistical terms and the plain English. We do that all the time in class. So we will talk about the statistical terms and concepts, and we will take that concept into real world context. So a quick and a simple example is this concept of maximum. Right, in statistics, I get to report the maximum in this numeric representation of students' performance in their homework. So it sounds very technical, sounds comprehensive, but that's in statistical language. If I translate that in plain English, I will just need to take a look at your homework 1 score, sort them from the smallest to the largest, right? Look at what you get and take the highest number. The highest number is the maximum of the numeric facts that I have in my data set. So, I mean, it's a simple example of statistical term in like regular day-to-day concepts that that we get to use. So we will gain the ability, the skill to do this translation. It requires some effort. So what specifically we get to learn to do? So it refers to the activity including collecting, analyzing, presenting, and interpreting data. So that's all included in the topic of statistics. Interesting that every year students come to me and ask, is it just doing math, right? Is it that I have a calculator and I press a few buttons in the calculator and I get to it? Not exactly. I mean, we can't avoid math in statistics. There are calculations we all get to do, but that's not the full picture, right? Doing the math, pressing buttons in calculator, getting the right number. Those are all doing analysis. But before that, there's another critical step. We get to collect data, right? You get to analyze something. You can analyze air. So you need to collect the information to analyze. So data collection is one key step in statistics. And we're going to see that in a few minutes. Once you get your data ready, right, in Excel or in any database, you start to analyze, right, using all the statistical tools we learned in this semester. And once you finish your analysis, you get to present your result in a meaningful way. Right, you can't just dump all hundreds of numbers to your audience. Audience will be overwhelmed if you show them like 100 of numbers you collected. But you could present the summary of those numbers, right? What's the average? What's the maximum? What's the minimum? What's the distribution? What's the range? What's the proportion of different things? So we get to present the data in a meaningful way. Sometimes in tables, sometimes in numbers, sometimes in figures, right? You can show a pie chart, a bar chart, a line graph, and you can read other visual representations from the book. So that's presenting the result, which is very important because you get to be able to communicate statistics to other people. And then we also want to be able to interpret data. And again, this goes back to this translation between statistical language to plain English. That's the step I usually call this making sense of data. Because people are going to ask you, what does that mean, right? What does it mean to me? What do I need to do? Or what do I need to do differently after you give me these statistics? So that's the key of being a helpful person using statistics in your job. And that's the value of this class. You can easily like press a few buttons in calculator or like do things manually. And you don't need me to watch you do that. But what I emphasize in my class is the interpretation. Once we get a number, right? Once we get a result using the statistical operation, what does that mean? What inference can we make? Like what that statistical concepts mean in real world context. So that's where I emphasize. And different professors have slightly different emphasis. Some professors really careful or focused on like the exact procedure, right? You get step one, you get to find the right formula. Step 2, you plug in the numbers in different locations in the formula. Step 3, right, you do addition and then subtraction and multiplication, blah, blah, and you get your numbers. I mean, that is important. But in my class, I rarely watch you do that. I will show you how to do it one time, but then I will trust you to do that on your own. What I would like to emphasize is, okay, once you get that number, let's say average homework score is 88. Okay, what does that mean? Right, my chairs, university, registrar, they're going to ask me, what does that mean? Well, then I need to interpret, okay, if students get 88 on average in their homework 1, it means they have a pretty good understanding of chapter 1. They understand most of the key concepts. It's not full point, not 95 or anything above. So it means there's a small gaps, maybe small details that we can drill into details, but that's not a deal breaker. The class is still doing great, right? 88 is B+. And in order to get that, there must be students that are already in the A range, like doing 90 and above. There are students also slightly lower, but if they are still in the B or C+ range, that's still pretty well. So I don't see any huge problem. I think students got the concept, all the content in chapter 1, and I think we can smoothly move on. So that's how we interpret data, how to make sense of a number, how to make sense of statistics. And that's what we want to do in this class. And I demonstrate that to you every week. So that means, right, we need to analyze our data and make sense of it. So then, okay, what's data? How do we get our data? The next concept about the data is that, okay, data are the facts and the figures, right, collected, analyzed, and summarized for presentation and interpretation. So if we collect all data in a particular study and organize them in a meaningful way, we got a data set for our study. So look at the concept here. The term statistics refers to numeric facts, but the concept of data are just facts and figures, right? It doesn't have to be numeric. As long as its information is a fact, we can collect, we can properly document and record. There is a way for us to analyze. So data is a very broad concept. All sorts of information, as long as you can measure them, record them in a meaningful way, we can collect and analyze and summarize it. So who can give examples about the data that is not numerical?
Would that be like colors or like pH colors?
Yes, yeah, very good. Yeah, colors, right? There may be red color or purple or blue. Yes, we collect that information. What does people like? But that is not in numeric form, right? We can collect the data on people's preference of color to design what's the color scheme of the next flyer for the event we are going to organize next month.
I was going to say also, just like in our book, countries, a list of countries, and maybe a list of names, anything that's more categorical.
Yes. Yeah, that's another good example, right? I wanted to look at my student population. I wanted to see, okay, who you guys are and where are you come from? Like we have A lot of students just from United States, from California, but we do have international students. I got students from China, I got students from India, I got a lot of students from Mexico, I got students from Colombia. I also have students from Korea, right? The list of countries and the student names, those are also data, even though they are not numeric. That's a very good example. What other examples we got?
What about like information from like marketing studies, like buying habits and preferences, things like that?
Yes, yeah, that is data. Yeah, that's a very good example. We wanted to do like a customer analytics, and we do surveys on their preferences, right? What's your ideal vacation? And people would say like, do you like to spend a day on the beach, or do you like to spend a day hiking in the forest? Do you want to just lay on the couch watching TV? Or do you want to like sit in front of your computer playing games for a full day? Right, like, yes, yeah, those facts we collect is data, and we analyze that. That's a very good example. What other data we can collect but not in numeric form?
How about how many homeowners are in forbearance right now?
How many homeowners?
How many mortgage people under a mortgage are in forbearance?
That could be in numeric, right? If we ask how many. No, that's a still good example. I mean, that is data for sure. So no, that's good example. So, well, then, okay, then let's change the question. Then what's the data that we can collect in numeric form?
In numeric form?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the number of mortgages that are people that are under a mortgage that are not paying
Okay,
for
yeah.
their home loan at the current time.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
okay.
a very good example in numeric, right? We can see how many people are not paying their mortgages. Yeah, we can see, okay, in the city of Claremont, I don't know, maybe 200 people are now doing that. Maybe in the city of Pomona, 220 people, right? So yes, we can collect that information in numeric form. What other data we can collect in numeric form?
I would say based off of kind of his example, we can go more historical and say what the prime rate was over the last 30 years.
Yes, yeah. What's the rate? Yeah, that's a good example. That's certainly in numeric. What other examples?
The amounts of each loan that is past due, the overall loan amounts when they first got the loans.
Yes, yeah, the amount of the loans, when did you get it, and number of past dues. Yes, yep. Wow, okay. I see we got a lot of real estate experts in our class. We didn't know that earlier. Nice. What other examples?
What about the ages of the borrowers, their income levels?
Yes, yeah, good example. Yeah, ages we do report. Income, yes, like does the person makes 50,000 a year or 45,000 a year or 60,000 a year? Yes, yeah, those are numeric values. Very good. Yeah, I mean, those are all good examples of data, right? So all of you have contributed some examples, and you see numeric value, non-numeric value are all data that we can collect, analyze, and interpret and make sense. So we do that all the time in statistics. We do that in all sorts of fields, right? I know you're all from the business school, so in accounting, economics, finance, marketing, CIS, like IBM, right? So EBIS, right? Anywhere your major is at, and also in all sorts of jobs you're doing, there are a lot of places you get to collect the data and make sense of data. So the next question is, how do we organize data in a meaningful way? Right, okay, if we want to collect the data on the borrower's name, their home address, their age, their annual income, right, their credit score, how much rent or what's the value of their current home. If we want to collect those information, what's the right way to organize that information, right? You can't randomly type in Excel. You can't tell, oh, A1, I put in something, then C3, I type in something, right? You want things to be nicely organized. So the way to put together a data set is mostly determined by variables and observations. So all the examples we just talked about, right, they are just characteristic of interest. They are all variables. And when we collect the information from the subjects, in this case, we collect the data from people, right? So those are our observations. If we send out the survey to 10 people, then and they all answered, then we got 10 observations. If we send it to 100 people, received 100 responses, we got 100 observations. But sometimes we don't do research on people, right? Sometimes we do research for cities. Let's say we wanted to see the city's crime rate. How does that increase or decrease over time? So we look at all the cities in Southern California. In that case, each city is an observation, right? If we look at a total of 50 cities, then we got 50 observations. Or if we look at the country's GDP growth, what's the United States GDP growth, what's Canada's, what's Mexico's, what's the UK's GDP growth, what's China's GDP growth, Japan's GDP growth, well, then countries are observations. So observation is simply the subject you take data from. So a data set will have to contain a number of observations and a number of variables. And we typically organize them in this manner. If you look at the columns, each column is an independent variable. So if we're interested in company name, right? Company name would be one standalone column. And now if we turn to the next characteristic we're interested in, okay, we're interested in which stock exchange they're at. We don't just keep typing in the same column. For this new variable stock exchange, we need to put it in a new column. And then for the next element we're interested in, annual sales. we need to make it another new column. And the next variable, earnings per share, another new column. So each variable needs to be in a new column. We don't have variables in the same column. That's going to mess up the analysis. So one column, a variable, that's the key. And then if you look at the rows right here, observations. So each row represents one observation. So for example, the first company we send survey to is DataRam. You see which stock exchange is at, what's its annual sales, earnings per share, right? That's all about the DataRam, this one company. So we record that all in the one consistent row. We don't move it. We don't move things around. It has to be in the same row. And then we move to the next company, Energy South. Okay, stock exchange, annual sales, earnings per share. That's a different row. So the key is every observation needs to be in their own row. Each one is a new row. So here we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We got 5 observations. So it needs to be in 5 different rows. And how many variables we got? We got company, stock exchange, annual sales, earnings per share. So we got 4 variables. It means we have 4 columns. So another translation between statistical language and the plain English is sometimes, and especially when you are at work, people will simply tell you, oh, I have a data set, right? My table is 10,000 by 20. Can you help me analyze? So what's this table of 10,000 by 20? Telling you the dimension of the data set is really telling you the number of observations and the number of variables. So 10,000 rows, meaning the data set contains 10,000 observations. And maybe you got 10,000 customers. Now you get to analyze their behavior. Or you got 10,000 employees. You get to make sure the information in the system is correct. Right? So 10,000 observations. Now, when they say 20 columns, they mean 20 variables. Right? If you are in HR, you got employee data, you probably have collected the variable of their name, their age, their gender, their home address, their phone number, which year they started in the company, what job title they hold, which department they work at, what's their supervisor's name, what's their supervisor's contact, right? So you have all that in separate columns. So you collected 20 of those characteristics. So that's what this 10,000 by 20 means. That's a pretty comprehensive data set, but now the largest. Practically, you can see data set with millions of rows. So that just means millions of observations. It may not be people. In my job, we look at energy supply and demand, and we have 5-minute interval data. So if we look at like past year or past several years, and you pile up 5-minute data, or like our customer data, it could be in millions. And then we have different rows different columns. We have like hour 1, hour 2, hour 3, hour 4, what's the energy demand, and then we have a column of day ahead market price, FMM market price, real-time market price, right? So we will also have a bunch of columns, but we have a lot of rows. But if you are doing a smaller scale research, you are just surveying your classmates around. You have maybe 15, 20 rows. That's just how many classmates you got. And then in the columns, you may ask, okay, what's your favorite color? What's the favorite font? Do you like to have pictures, or do you not want pictures in like flyers, right? You collect people's preference and you design the flyer for the next event. So the data set could be really large, but it could be small. It depends on the topic of your study. As long as you collect the needed information, you just need to organize them in the way with variables in the columns and observations in the rows. So that's typically what we need to understand about the data set. Any questions here?
Sounds good to me, Professor.
Yeah, thank you. So now let's do an exercise together. Like I said earlier, for the scope of this class, we don't do much of data collection. We focus more on analysis, presenting, and interpretation. But just today, we do one exercise for you to see how to collect the data on your own. So this is one way to collect data, and we do it together. So for example, I wanted to do a small project to have a better understanding of my student population. So I need to collect the data from my students. My area of interest includes, I wanted to see your name. Are you a junior or senior? And I may have even sophomores in my class. What's the last 2 digits of your student ID? Just curious. And then how far do you live away from campus? So who wants to volunteer your information? I'll just see how to put the data in your data set.
Would you like us to type it in the chat, Professor, or verbalize?
Yeah, you could. You could, Jason. Jason Senior. Last 2 digits, 44. How many miles away from school? 336. Where do you live?
Based in the Bay Area.
Oh wow! Oh my God, that's far. Okay, glad that we're doing everything on Zoom. Nice. Thank you for the information. Okay. Okay. Next one, Mikhail Senior. 17, 10 miles away. Okay, that's not too bad. Marcos Junior. Good, 4, 6, 5 miles away. And then Karina Senior. Let's see what else I did. 9 and this, 30 miles. That's also pretty far. Let me see what else I got. Christopher is a junior. Okay, 68, approximately 20 miles. Good. Katrina Junior 12 miles. Victoria. Senior 15, 20. Okay, Brenda. Sorry, Brenda. Junior 53, 10 miles. Melissa. Melissa's Junior. 98, 39 miles. Oh, okay, that's also far. Julio. Junior, 16 miles, sorry, 16, 20, Emily, Emily Junior. Okay, maybe 22, that's okay. 3, and Junior 36, 3 miles. Thank you. Christian Senior 42, 17. Okay, good. Very nice. Thank you. Wow. Okay. Good, good. I hope I didn't forget anyone. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. That's comprehensive information. So we just completed the data collection. How much time did it take us? 5 minutes, maybe? Right, so, I mean, really, I just wanted to demonstrate to you, if you get to do a project on your own, right, this is how you put together your data set. So you first of all need to decide what to collect and organize them into different columns. And once you have that set up, you start to go into your surveys, right? Reach your observations, reach your subjects. And then for each observation, type their information in the same row. Right, see here. Each observation is in one row. When you switch to the next observation, you must start a different row. Just typing information in the corresponding column. Let's say for any reason, if a student forgot their ID, it's okay if you have missing data. Leave it blank, move on, record the next number. If it's blank, okay, we can still get information from other input from the same row. So it's not devastating if you are missing a few things in your data sets. In statistics, sometimes people call a data set with no missing data people call that completed data or balanced data. If you have missing data, right, you have empty cells, people call it, well, incomplete data or unbalanced data. But it simply means you have empty cells. You don't have data for every single cell you need to fill in, which isn't a huge problem. But this is our data set, and you see anyone can do this, right? Anyone can pull out Excel, just type in numbers or type in data, numbers or text. And as you see, what I collected, 2 columns are non-numeric, right? Text message. The other 2 columns are numeric. So again, numeric, non-numeric, they are both data. And also we see some are more, or say, what inference can we make, right? I'm saying I wanted to get a better understanding of my student population. So here, when I look at my second column, I see, okay, how many seniors do I got? Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We got 5 senior students, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I got 8 junior students. So I have more junior students than senior students, right? That's the characteristic of this class, which interestingly, in my 8 o'clock class that I just completed earlier, in my 8 o'clock class, I have a lot more senior students than junior students. I think I only had, well, I didn't collect all the students' information, but for the 8 people I collected, only 2 were junior and 6 were senior. So, right, so now you see classes are different. Some classes have more senior students, but some classes like this class has more junior students. And then, well, last 2 digits of your ID doesn't tell much, right? They just say, well, you got different ID numbers. But miles away from school, well, first of all, we got an outlier, right? You learn the concept of outlier. The number is very, very different from the rest of the numbers in the data set. We got an outlier here. And then if we go to calculate the average, right? On average, how far do students live from campus? If I do include Jason, right, who lives in the Bay Area, that's really, really far, it actually inflated the average, right? It says, well, on average, the students are 40 miles away. But actually, no, right? When you look at the rest of the students, nobody lives more than 40 miles away. So probably the average isn't the best measure here, or maybe at least we should not include the outlier. If we don't include the outlier, then we see, okay, everyone who's living local, right, locally, then on average, right, my students are, yeah, about 16 or 15.75 miles away from campus. So that's probably like 25 minutes driving. And that's what I can see from my students. And then the inference is that, okay, now I'm transitioning on Zoom. So it's probably saving everyone like 25 minutes driving to campus and 25 minutes driving back home on average, right? And then like in Jason's case, it allows Jason to attend the class. Otherwise, that's almost impossible. So, right, that's what I can tell from the data I get. Without knowing this, I have no idea who's local, who's not local. Is it saving students time? Is it not? And I don't know, like, what's the level of students? Are my students more experienced or less experienced, or like really face graduation pressure or not that much? And so you see, this helps me get a better understanding of my students. And then later when I give examples, I will consider, okay, I have more junior students who are just naturally less experienced, less exposed to real world examples. So I probably need to explain this more detail, right? Be more patient. Versus the other class, when there are more senior students, maybe I can save some detail. They've probably seen a lot already. And also with senior students, if they really face the pressure to graduate and find a job, and I work in the industry, maybe I can try to share more like job openings and information like that to students who really need to find a job quickly. So, I mean, that's really how I can adjust myself based on my understanding of my students. And this is just one quick and simple and like feasible example I can give you in data collection and making sense of data. Right? So now everyone sort of get a better understanding of who you are working with, right? What's the class population. So does this make sense? Or do you have any questions? Make sense? Jason's good with this. What about everyone else? I don't want to leave anyone behind. Melissa's good. Marcus good. Serena good. Christopher good. Emily can. Okay, good. Yeah, thank you for the feedback. Thank you, Hector good. Nice. Yeah, I appreciate the feedback because once you confirm that you got it, then I'm confident to move on. So thank you for that. So that was all about. Can't promise I'll remember this in an hour. Well, that's why you might also want to go back to the textbook after class. I'm serious. Going back to the textbook after class will help you remember things like more firmly. And you want to do your homework before you forget all the material, right? Relatively soon or after class. If you have time later today, if you have time tomorrow, just do the homework and get out of your way. Don't wait until next Friday and when it's like 3 hours before the deadline and you scramble and like, oh, I don't remember what that means. But no, don't stress yourself in that situation. But yeah, no, I mean, a lot of things in statistics, you think it makes perfect sense when we go over it in class. But when you do it in homework, you start to struggle, like, oh, what is that? And that's totally natural. We will get used to that like later in the semester. After a few weeks, you will get into, you will be familiar with the pace and how it feels in class, and then you would understand why you actually need to go back to the textbook after class and then do homework right away after you read your textbook again. But we'll get there. So I just completed the lecture note 1 that was posted under module 1 in Canvas. And now this is the lecture note 2 I posted in module 2. Again, you got full access to all these lecture notes. So feel free to download and save and look at it anytime you want. So in module 2, we will dive deeper into the concepts about statistics. Still doesn't involve much of calculation. But now we wanted to talk about different classification of the data we collect. So we have a better understanding and we know what type of analysis we can do. So we start with the broader concept of descriptive statistics. So the exercise you just did, right, and the example you provided earlier are all good examples of descriptive statistics. So most of the statistic information we can access on regular basis in newspaper, magazine, company reports, and other publications. are descriptive statistics. So they are simply summarized and presented in tabular format or graphic format or numeric. So again, remember when you read a newspaper or just read the news, you will see, okay, 25% of the infected people are actually vaccinated in LA County. Right? I think that's a week ago, something I read the news like that. Now that's just one numerical number, right? Summarizing what people saw from thousands of patients. 25% are vaccinated people. So that's one summary. That's reporting what happened, just describing the COVID situation. We might also have tabular, which I'm going to show you in 2 slides. And we have graphic summary, and that's in 3 slides. Those are just simple ways to summarize and describe what's going on. So the description of past data is descriptive statistics. There's no sophisticated statistical operation. You are not doing any forecasting or prediction or optimization, like nothing comprehensive like that. You are simply recording and summarizing the fact so people can understand you. So describing what happened is descriptive statistics. There are many ways, I mean, you've read it in a textbook. There are many ways to describe the situation. And you can choose your favorite way or the way that your audience likes the most. But those are all descriptive statistics. Besides the example we just did together, now we look at a more industry-related example, not on daily basis, but you might see that at work. So the manager of Hudson Auto would like to have a better understanding of cost of parts used in engine tune-ups performed in her shop. So she wanted to do this study, right? What's the cost of parts? There must have been like thousands of jobs done in her shop in the past several years. But imagine how much time it's going to take if you analyze thousands of numbers. It's going to take a lot of time. So that's not practical. What this manager did was she randomly picked 50 invoices out of those thousands and did her analysis. So now instead of looking at the thousands of numbers, now we can look at 50 numbers. So here, so this is the data, right? This manager collected. Now looking at those 50 numbers, what inference can you make? Right, so say now we're the audience, we wanted to learn. Okay, what can we get from this manager's data of cost of parts for 50 tune-ups? So what's our understanding of the data? Anything? Again, think here's a total of 50 numbers in front of you. And now we're trying to make sense of the 50 numbers. Okay, very nice. See, range, right? Range is a statistical concept. I see you got that. So range is simply the difference between the largest number and the smallest number in your data set. So here we see the largest number or the highest cost is 109, and the lowest cost is $52. So we can calculate the difference, right? Using 109 minus 52, we see there's a range of $57. So it means one customer paid $57 more than another customer. $57 is a pretty large range, right? You can cover like a week's grocery shopping. So, okay, that's a large range. And at the same time, right, we see the highest 109, and we see the lowest 52. Right, so okay, if you want to get your engine tune up done, that's the range, right? It costs you. That's approximately what you get to be prepared for. If you don't even have $50, you say, well, I have $20 in my pocket. You probably won't be able to get this done. And at the same time, you also don't have to struggle for like several months and saving for like 500. No, it may go slightly above 100, but that's already the higher end. You may not even go that bad, right? So that's how we want to start to make sense of this data. Like, if we just want to like get into one number, we can calculate the average, right? So we can add together the 50 numbers and divide it by 50. So we say on average, right, it costs you $79. It may be slightly above, slightly below, but that's a safe estimation. And here again, in statistical term, we use the word mean. The mean is the average. Right? In plain English, we say, what's the average cost? What's the average temperature, right? What's the average score students get? We use the word average. But in statistics, we use the term the mean. What's the mean temperature? What's the mean cost? What's the mean score of student homework? So again, it's this interesting translation you get to do all the time to make sure you know the statistical concept, you know what it means in real world context, and how you can say that in plain English to help other people understand. I mean, it is a key skill. I can tell you, in my job, I have to do that on a daily basis. Not everyone in my job has a statistics background. And a lot of times I get to just do this translation, right? Here's the mean, well, on average, right, energy demand at hour 16 is this much, and it may fluctuate this much higher, this much lower. There is this much chance that it reach a different level, right? So like I get to translate all the statistical terms into things that people without statistical background can understand. They say, oh, okay, we actually get to generate this much, or we need to call the other generator to turn on the like a gas turbine, like all that. Or maybe we can tell that hydro generator to, yeah, maybe like shut down like one of the sections. So yeah, I mean, it needs to be interpreted to real world context. But here we could make inference, right? We just say, okay, if we calculate the average from those 50 numbers, we get a pretty good estimate on how much money you get to prepare, right? If you go to this shop for engine 2.1, right, the parts will cost you approximately $79, $80, maybe slightly more, maybe slightly less, but yeah, that's about the the level you get to prepare. So that's one summary, right? That helps us better understand the situation and get prepared. Another way to summarize the data is, so remember, one type of descriptive statistic is in tabular form. So this is one example of a tabular table. So it means we classify the data into different categories. We create the categories based on what we think is appropriate. So for simplicity, right, if we're talking about the dollars, for simplicity, I'll just cut them into like $10 range. So it's much easier to manage, right? In the 50s range, in the 60s range, the 70s range, and so on and so forth. So I decide to classify them into these many categories. And then the simple analysis we can do, again, we're not doing any calculation yet. Without calculation, a simple statistical operation we can do is to analyze the frequency, right? So we see, okay, in the least expensive range, between 50 to 59, what's the frequency, right? How likely are we going to fall into the least expensive range? How likely? Is it very likely that it's going to be cheap, just some 50? Well, we look at the data, there's a 57, there's a 52, but that's it. Everything else is above 60. So there's a total of 2 occurrences in the range of 50 and 59. So not very likely, right? We got a total of 50 numbers, and only 2 of those numbers are in this range. So it means not likely. What about the next range, 60 to 69? Now we go back and see, okay, yeah, sorry. We got a 62, a 69, 66, 62, 67, 65, 68, 68, 69, 67, 62, 69, and 62. So we get quite a lot in the 60s range. So that's a total of 13 occurrences, right? So we do that count for every single range. And after we finish all, we should end up with the same total as the number of invoices we're collecting, right? Here we got a total of 50 tune-up invoices, and we got a total of 50 occurrences in our summary data. So that's good. So again, this is one way, one out of many ways to summarize the data. It's not the only way, but it certainly helps us understand. Because here we see, oh, okay, between 50 to 59, there's only an occurrence of 2. That's low frequency, not likely to happen. Between 60 to 69, there's a frequency of 13. Between 70 to 79, there's a frequency of 16. Right? So compared to 2, those are large numbers or larger numbers. Can we just rely on this? I mean, yeah, 16 compared to 2, that's like 8 times of that number. So, I mean, it is important to recognize the frequency and the relatively, right, how likely that category is going to happen compared to other categories. If we only have a total of 50 invoices, 16 out of 16 out of 50 is a very large percentage, right? It's 32% because we use 16 divided by 50. It's over 30%. So almost a third of time, the cost is between 70 to 79. So it means there is a decent chance that we got cost in this range. But if we have a total of 500 invoices, and we say 16 occurrences are between 70 to 79, then that's not high, right? The 16 out of 500, that's pretty low. So the point I'm making is we can't really make an inference by only looking at a frequency in one category, right? 16 means a lot if your total is 50, but 16 means very little if your total is 500. So how to make it comparable? To make it comparable, we get to translate it into percentage. Now we're saying among the total in the 100%, what percentage, how likely it is. Because the higher the percentage, the more likely this is going to happen. So it is simply done by using the frequency divided by the total. So 2 divided by 50 is a 4%. 13 divided by 50 is a 26%. 16 divided by 50, we got 32%. Right? So that's how we got percent frequency. And from here, it's very easy to tell, okay, what category, right, has the higher chance to happen. And we can compare across. Doesn't matter if you have a total of 50 invoices or you go to a different shop that has an analysis done for 500 invoices, or you go to a different shop that analyzed 200 invoices, you just compare the percentage, right? There's 1/3 of the chance your cost will be between 70 to 79. That's in this shop. If you go to the shop with 200 invoices, but they say, oh, there's only 10% chance your cost will be there. 40% of the time, it will cost you 90 to 99. Then you will say, wow, that's a more expensive place. So what's more comparable is the percent, and you want to translate that into percentage to make it comparable. But overall, this is a nice summary, a tabular summary of the data we saw from the manager. But when we just saw the 50 number, it was overwhelming. Right? We were not able to get too much information from here. Okay, we saw the maximum, we saw the minimum, we saw the range. It takes some calculation to get the average. But like how likely each range happens, right? I mean, between 52 to 109, how much should I be preparing? What should I be expecting? And now with this tabular summary, we see, oh, okay, between 60 to 69 or between 70 to 79, those ranges happen more frequent. So maybe we can expect that to happen. Like don't hold your breath to hope for like 50, 59, that's low chance. And also probably don't worry too much that you get to like prepare more than 100, because that's also relatively lower chance. Right, so again, seeing that's how we try to make sense of data. We look at, okay, 50 numbers, and now we analyze the data, we try to see, okay, if we want to visit the shop, get the engine tune-up done, what budget should I prepare? What I should be expecting, right? So you sort of set your own expectation based on the statistics you know. And so that's one way to present the data. Another way to present the data, which I'm showing you here, is a histogram. So this histogram shows exactly the same information as we showed here in the tabular summary. This is personal preference. Some people like to see chart like this, but some people prefer to see table. And figure out your audience. Your manager will tell you what he or she likes, and then provide what he or she likes. If your manager likes to see a tabular table, then give her the table. If your manager is a more like a visual person, which like my peer manager is a very visual person, when I talk to him and prepare a report for him, I like to put in charts because he understands the charts immediately. Then just you get to do that. And you also need to be able to do now the translation between your table to the chart. So typically in histogram, we have horizontal axis representing the different categories, going from the lowest to the highest. And then on the vertical axis, we usually have frequency or percent frequency. Here, for simplicity, I'm just plotting the frequency. So from here, we see that, okay, in the category of 50 to 59, there's a frequency of 2, right? Low frequency translating to a very short bar in 50 to 59. So you see the first bar is at 2 on the vertical axis. But then the next category, 60 to 69, is a much higher frequency of 13. So when that's translated into the chart, you see a much taller bar, and the tall bar is mapped to 13 on the vertical axis, right, representing 60 to 69. Then you look at the next bar showing 70 to 79. It's an even higher frequency. So the bar is mapped to frequency 60, right? That's the tallest bar. And then you have shorter and shorter bars. So histogram is typical bar chart showing the frequency or percent frequency for all the categories you have in the data set. So that's just typically how we summarize our descriptive statistics. So any question in this example? Are we good here? Makes sense? Good. No question? Good, good. Okay, nice. So from this practice, I wanted you to understand the process of making statistical inference. I mean, it's not hard. We've just gone through the process, but I want it to be replicable so you can do that on your own. So how to make statistical inference? First of all, a few concepts. The one statistical concept is called population, which is different from the population concept we use in plain English, right? It's not how many people are there in Southern California, right? Southern California population, or like the population of the city of Pomona, how many people live in the city of Pomona. No, that's not what we mean in statistic. In statistic, population means the set of all elements. That means everything, all the observations. And in the example we just had, right, if the manager wanted to study invoices of the customers, her population is actually the thousands of invoices that, right, she served the customer in the past several years, thousands of invoices, which again could be overwhelming, or is usually overwhelming. So it's not practical to study population most of the time. What's practical, like what this manager did, is to look at a subset of the population. We don't look at thousands of invoices, but we randomly choose a set of 50 invoices, and we do our analysis. So a sample is a subset of the population. And you read the textbook about the random sampling, right? You don't want it to be biased. You want to be representing like different situations. But in short, it is a subset of the population. So that's what a sample is. And right, we just took a sample of 50, did our analysis. And when we make inference, right, this is the exercise of using data obtained from a sample to make estimates and test hypotheses or claims about characteristics about a population. So in other words, we study the sample and we generalize the conclusion from the sample to the population. So even though we didn't see, right, even though we didn't see the thousands of invoices, just from the sample of 50 invoices, we concluded that there is a high chance that the cost of parts will be somewhere between 60 to 80, right? The tau is the 2 bars. There's a very, very small chance that your cost of parts will be lower than 60. And also not too high of a chance that it's exceeding 100. Maybe there's a small chance, but don't worry too much about it, right? So we're making inference about all the customers, all the invoices in the shop, and you are giving this information to your friends who's planning to visit, right? Who hasn't visited the shop yet and was thinking like, oh, how much should I prepare, right? All these. So that's the process of making estimates for the population, even though we just look at the sample. That's making statistical inference. So in other words, we're making an educated guess about the population with what we studied about the sample. So yeah, there is a little bit of guessing. It's not 100% accurate, but again, given the situation that you don't have time, it's not practical to look at thousands of numbers. Analyzing this 50 and concluding something meaningful is good enough. That's typically what we do in statistics. So it's a 4-step process. Step 1, determine the topic, right? Determine your population. What do you want to study? Okay, I want to study the cost of parts. And there's a total of thousands of invoices. That's your step 1. Step 2 is to select a sample that's manageable to you. And here we have a sample of 50. Step 3 is to analyze the sample, right? We look at the maximum, minimum, the range, the percent, the frequency in different categories. We do all that analysis. And step 4, take that conclusion, take that observation from the sample to the population and tell people, okay, what's likely to happen, what's not. So that's the 4-step procedure of making statistical inference. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Yes, good, thank you. So all we have practiced is about descriptive analytics, right? We just practiced how to go from a population to a sample to do our analysis and finally conclude. So we've done that for what happened in the past. It's not comprehensive. What will be more comprehensive and complicated is that if we want to start talking about the future, right? If we want to talk about things we don't see, we will be doing predictive analytics. So we will still need to use past data, but we will use more advanced statistical tool to analyze historic data in order to predict the future or to construct a correlation between different factors. So, for example, let's predict the temperature for next week, right? We haven't seen next week's temperature, we haven't experienced, but can we do the prediction? Yes, with statistics, we can certainly do that. We can look at the temperature trend, right? Look at this year's entire August, what temperature it has been, right? It has been relatively smooth. It started to trend up in this past week and keeps trending up. So based on this trend, right, based on what happened in the past months, we can predict, yeah, probably next week is going to be on the warmer and the high 90s, because that's what the trend is. And also, we can look at same months last year, right? What about late August, early September in year 2020? What about the temperature in 2019? So we can look at that and see if it's the same trend, if it's the same level. And if it's about the same, then we can be more confident about our temperature prediction. And then we can, so that's the predictive analytics, which we are going to learn towards the end of the semester. After exam 2, we will have a few lectures talking about regression analysis, predicting what we can't see, using what we could see from the past. And then another aspect is to assess the impact of one variable on the other, right? So we just talk about the variable temperature. I can analyze the impact of this temperature to energy usage, right? Okay, one is temperature, the other is energy. How can these two things relate? Because when the temperature is high, the demand of turning on air conditioning will be higher, right? All of us turn on our home air conditioning. We want to stay cool and comfortable. All the shops and offices turn on, right? Everyone wants to be comfortable. So air conditioning certainly uses electricity. That means a high demand in energy, right? Then again, we get to coordinate with our generators. Some are solar generators, some are wind, some are hydro, some are gas fired. And we need to coordinate with them and ask them to please generate more energy to serve our customer. So you see, that's the connection, that's the impact of one variable to other variables, right? How temperature affects the energy demand, and how energy demand affects our work, or how the generation facilities function, right? Do we turn on this generator during our 16, during our 17, during our 18? Probably yes, because those are usually high demand hours. So those are the type of more advanced analytics we can study later in the semester. And again, it's widely used in the industry, likely to be used in your job. And another more advanced analytics, sometimes people call this optimization, but it's also called prescriptive analytics. So it simply means using what's done before, right? Using your predictive analytics and descriptive analytics to figure out the best course of action. Like I said, to contact the generators, be prepared to generate more energy during peak demand hour. That's the course of action we need to take based on other analysis we've done. It's a lot of work. We get to collect the data on temperature. We get to collect the data on like the past energy usage. We get to collect the data on the generating capacity of our generators, and the data on the efficiency level of the generators, and also data on like the price of energy in the market. Should we be buying that, or should we be generating our own, right? So it needs a lot of data, a lot of analysis, but the point here is that's possible. We can use descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive analytics to allow us to make better decisions and allow us to work very efficiently, like serve our customers, do our job better, like do better saving now to or like generating like higher revenue, or even like getting customers into certain programs, right, that incentivize them not to use energy during peak hours and not to add too much burden to the grid. So all sorts of implications, we can all get there through statistics. For the scope of this class, we will be very light on prescriptive analytics. Towards the end of the semester, when we talk about the regression analysis, we will discuss a little bit. But we will start with descriptive analytics. Start with analyzing data of what's happened in the past, and then move on to predictive analytics. So that's the key scope of this class. But later, when you go to other classes and you go to your job, you will have the chance to get more familiar with all these concepts. So that's what we have for like the general concepts. The next topic, scale of measurement, is a relatively technical concept in chapter 1. And that is what I do want to spend more time and emphasize. Now it's 12:34, so let's take a short break. Take a 6-minute break, get some water. If you want to get some snack, get some food, stretch your legs, make yourself comfortable. We will resume at 12:40. Yes, yeah. Take a break, come back at 12:40, and we talk about scales of measurement. I'll see you in 6 minutes. Yes, okay, good. Okay, thank you. So let's continue with the most important and the technical concept here. So we wanted to learn about the classification of data. And the reason behind it is the classification of data can tell us the amount of information the data contained in the data. And also based on the amount of information in the data, we can easily understand what type of statistical operation we can do for the data we collected. So there are multiple ways to categorize the data. We start with the most basic, which is the scales of measurement. So there are a total of 4 scales of measurement. The lowest scale is nominal. The second lowest is ordinal. The next is interval. And the highest scale is ratio. So the lowest scale contains the least amount of information, and the highest scale contains the most amount of information. In other words, the lowest scale, not much statistical analysis can be done, but if you got interval or ratio data, there are a lot of statistical tools and operations you can use to better understand the data. So now we want to go into each scale of measurement and see examples of what variables belong to this category. And what type of analysis can we start with, knowing the amount of information we have. So to start with the lowest scale of measurement, nominal scale. So nominal scale, data are labels or names used to only identify an attribute of an element. It may use non-numeric label or numeric code. So the key is it only serves as an identifier. It doesn't serve for any other purpose. Like only as an identifier, you just know, okay, here's one element, here's 8 different elements, right? You see their names, so you know, okay, they are different. And that's about everything you know in nominal scale. So the example here is, we look at all students in Cal Poly, right? And we survey them, oh, which school are you from? So some students are from the business school, some are from humanities, some are from education, some from engineering, some from agriculture, right? All from different schools. So just from the name of the school, like business, humanity, education, we can do anything, right? Without knowing other data, without knowing like enrollment, without knowing size, without knowing how many faculties or how many classes they offer, without knowing other data, just know, okay, there is a business school, there's a humanities school, there's an education school. Just knowing the names, we can't do any comparison, right? We can't say humanity is shorter than business or education is bigger than this. No such thing exists, right? Those concepts don't make sense. So we can't even do comparison. We just know, oh, there are different schools in the university. And even though we can translate or transform the non-numeric label into numerical code, we still can't do anything about it. The numerical code carries the same meaning and the same amount of information as the non-numeric label. So if I want to save time from typing, right? If I type business or humanity, those are many letters I get to type like one after another. I can make my own code book. My own code book says 1 denotes business, 2 denotes humanity, 3 denotes education, right? So now when I survey students, I ask, which school are you from? The students say business, and I just type 1 because I know in my code book it says it's business. And then the next student from education, then I type 3, right? I don't have to type the whole word. So in my data set, you will then see the numeric code. But again, they don't carry other meaning. I can't say 3 is greater than 1 because it doesn't carry the number function. It's simply an identifier telling me it's a different school. So even if it's shown in numeric format, we can't do any algebraic operation. So that's the limitation of nominal scale. They really are just an identifier. So based on this description, who can give examples on nominal scale variables?
Right now, I could say that yesterday I had to get some data from a website so I can get names of NFL players that I'm going to do in my NFL fantasy draft and rank them.
Oh. Okay, yes, yeah, name of NFL players, yes, that is nominal scale, right? Just with name, you can't compare, you need to compare them using other variables, but with name alone, you can't do anything. Yes, that's a good example.
Like a combo from like a fast food restaurant, like a combo from a fast food restaurant.
Yeah, that's another good example. Yeah, like if you go to In-N-Out, there's what is, or like double combo, and then like this cheeseburger combo, and then there's another some sort of combo. But yeah, I mean they are different, but just knowing the name of the combo doesn't help you compare. Very good example.
What about a zip code or an area code and a phone number?
Yes, very good example. So even though we see numerical code, like zip code or phone number or area code, those numbers cannot be used in algebraic operation, right? They are just an identifier. You can't add the zip code together. You can't divide your area code. You can't calculate the average, right? Those don't make sense. So yeah, those are good identifiers. Very good example. Those are in numeric form, but nominal scale. What other examples? Anyone else? Think about what you encounter in just on regular basis, daily life or at work. Think about it. What are nominal scale variables? So if I pull out our own data, in my data set, what are nominal scale variables? Anyone? Oh, okay, see Christopher.
Juniors and seniors?
That's slightly different. You actually know that the seniors hold more seniority than junior, right? That actually has a comparison. what's even more fundamental that you can't compare at all?
Names?
Yes, yeah, okay, I started to see in chat window. Well, Fortune 500 companies, yes, company name are nominal scale. Names, yes. Names are identifiers, labels. We can't compare people name. We can't say, John is bigger than Kelly, right? No such thing. You can compare name. And student ID, yes. Even though those are numeric representation, they don't mean any number, right? They don't carry algebraic functions. Not miles away, because miles away you can do a lot of calculation. They are not just identifier, right? You can do calculation. You can do a lot of analysis. You can rank them, order them, and you can calculate the ratio. So that's a more advanced measure. But yes, name and ID, those are nominal scale. Yeah, so understand the concept. It only serves as an identifier. If you are able to do any comparison and you are able to tell, oh, this is greater than the other, or that's taller, that's shorter, that's more, that's less. If you are able to tell that, that's not nominal scale. So nominal scale really doesn't carry any new information. But we see that everywhere. We have different hair colors. Right? I have black hair. My friend has brown hair. Another friend has blonde hair. Another friend has gray hair. The hair color is nominal scale. Can't really compare. Think about ethnicity. Right? A lot of us have different ethnicity background. Caucasian, Latino, African American, Asia, Pacific Islander, right? Those are different ethnicity groups, but can't be compared, right? We are simply different human beings. And since we have on regular basis, like today is a warm day, I'm thinking about after class, I'm going to get some ice cream and think about ice cream flavors, right? Vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, mango, pistachio, cherry, right? So ice cream flavors are also nominal. Right? They're just different. You go to the store, you see all those different labels and you choose from. So we see a lot of nominal scale variables just in our daily life, and we don't even realize what car do you drive? Do you drive a Honda or a Toyota or a Ford or a Hyundai? Those are also nominal scale, right? Without knowing other statistics, that the name itself just tells you, oh, that's a different car maker. That's it. So not too much we can do if we just know the name or the label. But the moment we can start doing comparison, which in our own data set, we had this sophomore, junior, senior variable, right? That's years at school. So we actually naturally know the seniority of those years at schools. So we know that freshman has the least seniority, and sophomore has some, junior has more, and the senior student has the most seniority, has the most knowledge about the school, right? So we know the rank, right? We know the most junior and the least junior people in this rank. Even though we can't quantify the difference, right? We can't say how exactly the senior student is different from the junior student. We just say, yeah, they spend more time at school, they took more classes, but that's it. So without any precise capture of the difference, we have a ordinal scale variable. So ordinal scale data have the properties of nominal data and the order or the rank. So in other words, we can do comparison in ordinal scale. We can tell higher rank, lower rank, higher order, lower order. But the limitation is we can't precisely measure the difference in different ranks, in different orders. So the ranks and orders may be non-numeric label, maybe numerical code, but all the function they carry is one, still as identifier, and two, some sort of order or rank. And the statistical or the type of analysis you can do includes just some high-level comparison. That's all you can do. With nominal scale, you can't even do high-level comparison. You can only do count number, right? Okay, I have more junior students than senior student, or like I have more people with the ID ended in 4, but fewer people with ID ended in like 0. Or I have more students, first name starting with like a C, or I have fewer students, first name starting with A, or things like that. You can count, but you can do more analysis. Here with ordinal scale, yeah, you can do all that, and you can do some high-level comparison without any detail, without any consistent quantifiable measure. So like a seniority at school, right, among students is one good example of ordinal scale. So you do see the rank, but not the exact quantifiable difference between different ranks. So what other examples do we have for ordinal scale?
The grades like ABC.
Yes, that's a good example. Yes, grade A, B, C, D, F, right? We all know A students are the top ones. B students are still good, but not as good as the A students. C students are also good, but not as good as the B students, right? Yes, we see the difference of that. Not precisely how different, but yeah, we know who's better. Ranking of student GPA, like the A students, B students, C students.
Would an example be satisfaction ratings, like extremely disliking or disliking something being neutral?
Yes, very nice. Yeah, exactly. If you are collecting like a customer feedbacks, right? You send a survey to customer. How satisfied are you with our service? And it goes from not satisfied at all to somewhat not satisfied to neutral or satisfied or very satisfied, right? So along the scale, the further they go, the more the more satisfied they are. So that's a very good example. Typically widely used in surveys. It's just different level, and we know which level is lower, which level is higher, even though we can't really quantify. We know they are different. We know what's better, what's worse. So very, very good example. Very practical, and you do that at work all the time. So really nice. What other examples? What other things you can rank or no, like a high level, higher, lower, but not exactly, you can't measure the exact difference.
Would radiation levels work?
What are the levels?
Red means dead.
Oh yeah, yes. Yeah, that also works. Yep. Yeah, you know what's better, what's worse, but not exactly how much. Yep. Yes, opt levels. Okay, help us understand. I mean, that's outside my area of specialization. So how that's measured, macros?
Just the 3 different gases: premium, premium unleaded, regular unleaded.
Okay. Yes. Yep. Yeah. That's another good one. Yeah, we know which one is like more pure, right, or like more efficient. So, yeah. Good example. And also, I mean, even not only among students, right? Like, okay, you have freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Among professors, there's also the ranking. I mean, I'm not tenure track, I'm just part-time having fun here, but your full-time professors are ranked from assistant professor to associate professor to full professor, right? We know the assistant professors are the least experienced, the most junior ones. The associate professor are somewhat like moderately sophisticated, gained some experience, and your full professors are the most experienced, the most sophisticated, most knowledgeable ones, right? Yeah, there's ranking professors. What about synthetic benchmark scores like the CP? Yes, yeah, that the benchmark, yes, because they categorize the metric in like certain buckets and intervals. So yeah, that's another one. Like in the military, right, we have different ranks, or in regular company setting, like corporate America. After you graduate, you find a full-time job, you probably start somewhere like an associate specialist, right, when you don't have much full-time job experience. And then after a couple of years, if you do well, you probably can become a specialist. And then the next level will be a senior specialist, then advisor, senior advisor, then senior manager, principal manager, director, VP, like president, all that. So, I mean, the title indicates seniority level, like the function of your job, how sophisticated it is, how much knowledge you have, how much value you create at that function. So we certainly can tell, okay, a senior advisor is at a higher rank than a specialist. But again, we will struggle with measuring like the exact difference. Like we can't measure that. Height, weight, age. So that's an interesting one. That belongs to the next category because you can precisely measure, right, height, weight, and age. You can precisely know if the other person is 1 inch taller than you or 2 inches taller than you. Or weight or age, you could. So if you want to create a ordinal scale variable, what you could do is, again, you put people in buckets. You can say underweight, or like a regular, healthy, normal weight, or overweight, and then obese, right? Then you know, like along those categories, the further they go, the heavier they are, but not precisely how different. And similarly in age group, in age, you can make them age groups. you can have like juniors or middle age or senior people, right? And then you categorize people into those buckets. And then you just say, okay, overall, right, this group of people is more senior than the other group. So, and then that's actually a great segue to the next measure. So the next scale of measurement, which now will cover height, weight, and age. This is interval scale. So if we want to, right, if we can rank the data, we can do comparison, and we want to precisely measure the difference. If we want to precisely measure in the fixed unit, right? Is it 1 inch or 1 pound or like 1 year? If we have the fixed unit of measure to see how exactly things differ, then we got the interval data. And because of that, because we need to measure precisely, interval data must be numeric. So we can do the subtraction, right? We see the exact unit of difference. Like height is a good example. I'm 5'7". My friend is 5'5", so I'm 2 inches taller than my friend. Weight, yeah, that's also easier to see, like who's lighter or who's how much. Like me, I'm 5 pounds heavier than pre-COVID. I guess we all are. We all are 5 pounds, 10 pounds heavier than pre-COVID. Age, okay, if I ask like one student is 20 years old, another student is 21 years old, and another student is 30 years old, then I know student 2 is 1 year older than student 1, and student 3 is 10 years older than student 1. Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we all gained some weight during COVID, and that's just I don't know how to cure that, but you see how do you get that, right? You have this interval scale measure. You record what your weight was pre-COVID, and you get on a scale now, which I don't want to do that. You see how much you weigh now, and then you calculate the difference, like 5, 10, like, oh. But no, I mean, don't worry about that. Like now, I mean, things start to get slightly better, and once you get back to work, you start to like walking around campus, walk around like a park, a hiking trail, go to gyms. It is going to go back to normal, hopefully. It takes time, but if we are all at the same place, then nothing to worry, right? Everyone raises 5 to 10 pounds, then the difference, right? The difference between you and your friends remain about the same. So no need to worry too much. I always say that to myself, so I don't stress myself out. Yeah, I mean, those are all good examples about the interval data. Right, and then like going back to the school context, looking at your test score. If Melissa has SAT score of 1985 and Kevin has SAT score of 1880, we know Melissa has a higher score. How much higher? Right, we can calculate precisely 1985 minus 1880, and we see, oh, Melissa is 105 points more than Kevin. So we can measure precisely how different these are. Right, so does that make sense? The difference between ordinal scale versus interval scale. How we measure the difference, or can we measure the difference? Yes. Who can give examples on interval scale variables? A credit score, yes, that's a good example, right? So some people have really good credit score, like 800, and some people have still good, but like 780, and we know the 800 is 20 points higher than the 780. Yeah. A gas mileage, yes. Is it running 30 miles or are you running 25 miles? Right, there's a 5-mile difference. Temperature, great example. Like I said, this week is pretty warm. I think today is 96. Compared to last week, last week some days was like 88. So 96 compared to 88, 8 degrees higher. But compared to previous year, that's a different measure. Yeah, we can see precisely, right, how much higher or lower the temperature is. And that's actually a good topic. So let me ask you this. How do you feel if the weather forecast tells you temperature is going to be 0 in 3 months? How do you feel?
I would need to change my wardrobe.
Because
California is not used to 0 temperature.
Because California is not used to that, because it's a very low temperature, right? It feels so cold if it's 0. So, but the point is 0-degree temperature, right? The 0, this number in the temperature context makes perfect sense. We know there's even negative temperatures, right? I visited my friend in Alaska this summer, and they told me in the winter, it was like a negative 20 degrees. And they were like, yeah, 0 is cold, but it's not the worst. So, I mean, a 0 degree, right, in the temperature context makes perfect sense. It's a low value. We know that, yeah, I would not go outside either. That's a very good statistical inference, right? 0-degree temperature, okay, that's a statistic, and the inference is cold. We don't want to go outside. See, we do that naturally, making inference from statistics. So the 0-degree temperature, it's a low value, but it makes sense, right, in the whole scale. And similarly, even in like SAT or GRE, those exams, like some students get 0 in these exams, is because of in the exam system, right? The system says if you answer the less than 3% correct, like the score will show 0. So the key is the 0 in like the temperature context and the 0 in like the exam score context are actually human defined value. And the 0 makes sense, right? It's a low value, but it makes sense. It doesn't mean an absence of score, and it doesn't mean an absence of temperature. Would horsepower number fit? Yes. Yeah, that would fit in. That's a good example. Yep. So what I wanted to emphasize is the 0 number in those contexts makes sense. They are just a low value, and it's a human defined value. However, the 0 value in some other context, in some other measure, do not mean that. in ratio scale, right, the highest scale of measurement, 0 value means absolute 0. Absolute 0 means nothing, right? Means the absence of anything. So ratio scale is very, very similar to interval scale. Very similar. It has every characteristic that the interval scale data has, right? All the properties of interval scale data. Plus, now we can calculate the ratio of two values. So in other words, with ratio data, you can divide one number by the other. And another characteristic is 0 value now becomes absolute 0. So 0 value in ratio scale is no longer a human defined level. It becomes absolute 0. So look at the example here. So the price of a book at a retail store is $200, super expensive. But if you look at it online, it's only $100. So the statistical operation we can do, I mean, besides using 200 minus 100, you can easily say, oh, like online is $100 cheaper. Yeah, that you can do as interval data. Well, at the same time, you can also use 200 divided by 100 and tell that the retail store charges twice the online price. So that's the meaning of ratio. So you can do division and the result, the concept makes sense. And then regarding 0 value, right? So again, think about textbook. If the book is 200 in retail store, 100 online, what did you pay for my online version? I uploaded one version on Canvas last week. How many of you were using that? Well, what did you pay for that? Right. If you paid $0 for, yes, exactly, free, you paid $0. So a $0, right? 0 in this scale means you didn't pay anything, right? It's an absence of dollar amount. You don't pay anything. So that's absolute 0. It means absolutely nothing. So like a dollar value is a perfect concept of ratio scale. Like 0 means absolutely nothing. Not that, but again, think about 0 degree temperature. It doesn't mean no temperature, right? It's a low temperature, but not an absence of temperature. Can you tell the difference? Yes, no, yes. It's a slightly tricky concept. Like, what does 0 mean? Any questions? I mean, I'm happy to repeat if you want me to. You good? Okay. So I mean, that's the only difference of, between ratio scale and interval scale. And similarly, right, we got some other ratio scale measures. For example, if I ask you, how many miles have you drove today? You're like, nah, it's still like morning, early afternoon. I have been at school in class, right? I haven't gone anywhere yet. I drove 0 mile, right? That's another absolute 0, right? It means the absence of any mileage. You didn't drive anywhere, so that's absolute nothing. So that's another ratio scale. Or if I ask you, how much time did you spend studying statistics yesterday? And you were like, no, yesterday I was busy at work or I was busy with other classes. I didn't do anything yesterday. I read the book 3 days ago. Okay, if yesterday you didn't do anything, you spend 0 minutes, right? That's no time at all spent for statistics. And that's again an absolute 0. It's not any like human defined concept. I did not define the 0 in your answer. So that's the tiny difference between interval and ratio scale. And again, I understand it's a little tricky. It's not as straightforward. But the good news is, don't worry about this. Practically, I'm a very practical person. So practically, most of the time at school or at your work, you don't need to tell the difference between interval and ratio scale. And the reason is that ratio scale data carries all the property of interval data and carry almost all the statistical operations that's available. So ratio interval scale are so similar that you can almost use all the same statistical tools and mechanisms to analyze that data. So don't worry too much about interval and ratio data. What you do need to understand is how interval and ratio data is different from ordinal data and how they are different from nominal data. So those are huge differences because, like I said, nominal scale data, almost no statistical tools can be used to analyze, very limited. You do a few counts and that's about it. And ordinal scale, yeah, you can start doing comparison, but really high level, you can't measure the exact difference between different levels. But when you get to interval and ratio scale, you are able to measure the exact difference, and then you are able to add things together, subtract. You can calculate the average, right? You can sort them, see the largest, the smallest. You can do all sorts of statistical analysis. So just keep in mind that interval and ratio data carries the most amount of information. And most of the statistical tools and operations can be done in interval and ratio data, but not as much for nominal and ordinal data. So those are the scales of measurements. Do we have any questions? In a ratio scale, can variables be negative? Yes. Yeah, very good question. Variables could be negative. Yeah.
My question was kind of similar in the fact that does ratio only work with just numbers that have absolute 0 values, or can they work with numbers that are negative as well? So kind of like that similar question.
Yes, yeah. Negative value can appear in ratio and also interval scale. Yeah, so think about temperature, right? Temperature is interval scale, but there is negative value in temperature. It's just the 0 is a human defined term or measure in that context. So yes, negative value could exist in both interval and ratio scales.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Other questions? No? Okay. So, I mean, that's one key topic in chapter 1, the scales of measurements. Following that, there are another few classification of data. We'll briefly go over And so the purpose of this is for you to get a good understanding of how to classify the data and have the right expectation of how much analysis and how much inference can you make from the data. So that's all we're trying to do today. So another classification is, do we have categorical or quantitative data? Similarly, right, quantitative data can only be numeric. And then the nature of quantitative data allows us to do all sorts of statistical analysis. However, categorical data is not. So categorical data sometimes is also referred to as qualitative data, are mostly like names or labels that just identify an attribute of an observation. Sometimes they are non-numeric, sometimes they are numeric, but appropriate statistical analysis or the techniques are very limited. So you can't do too much about qualitative data or categorical data, but you can do a lot with quantitative data. Because quantitative data usually indicates like how many, how much, right? How many children are there in the household? How much money do you make a year? How many miles do you have to drive today? How much water do you drink today? So, I mean, those are quantitative data, always numeric. So given that, on page 19, I'm giving you a summary chart for the categorization. So for any data you collect, you can try to put them into buckets like this. So you can first classify your data to be quantitative or categorical. If your data is categorical, they may be numeric, right? Like your zip code, maybe like your student ID number, right? So it may be numeric, maybe non-numeric, right? What ethnicity group is your background? What gender, right? All that. And they may be nominal, maybe ordinal. So, and again, not much statistical analysis can be done there. You may be able to rank them a little bit. You can count them, but not much other activities you can do. But if your data is quantitative, first of all, they must be in numeric format. And if they're in numeric format, no huge difference, right, between interval or racial data. You can do addition, subtraction, you can do division, right, get the ratio. You can sort your data, figure out the maximum, the minimum. You can add and then divide and calculate the average. You can do even more sophisticated operation to calculate what we're going to learn next week, like a variance, a standard deviation, mean absolute deviation, coefficient of variation to do comparison. So many different things you can do for quantitative data. So that means when you collect your data, try to understand which category do they belong to, and then have the right sense of how much information you can get out of your data. Right? Just have the right expectation. And then think about the right statistical tools or analysis to use for your data. So that's the classification of data. Another classification I just want to briefly introduce is cross-sectional versus time series data. So all the examples we have talked about, like everything, all the examples we talk about in this class so far are cross-sectional. Because we collect the data at the same point, right? We ask, okay, what was our earlier example? We ask about, okay, student ID, right? I asked you all at the beginning of the class, I recorded that. I asked how far do you live away from campus, right? That's all recorded together. You can answer a survey to tell how satisfied are you with a certain service, right? You ask 100 customers and 100 customers all send you their response. So you collect all those data at one time point, or me looking at your homework one score, right? I think I got 18 students from this class section. So I look at all 18 scores and see, okay, who's the highest, who's the lowest, what's the average, right? What's the range? So data collected from multiple observations, right? From all my 18 students, or from 100 of your customers, or from 200 households you surveyed, right? Or from 100 cities in Southern California. Like all the data collected at the same point from different observations is cross-sectional data. And we are very familiar with this concept. Do that all the time, right? Collect data for your project, you go ask a survey, get it. But we may have data in a totally different type, and that's a time series data. So time series data are collected over several time periods. I mean, it doesn't make sense for certain variables. So for example, if you collect the age if you collect data on gender, no matter when and how many times you ask, people's gender don't change, right? Or you ask people's name, you can ask it over time. I ask you now, I ask you next week, I ask you at the end of the semester, but that doesn't change. So those don't really make sense. But if I look at your homework score over several time periods, I look at one student, okay, Hector. What Hector get in homework 1? What did Hector get in homework 2? What did Hector get in homework 3, in homework 4, right? I track this one student homework score over the 16 weeks. And I see the student performance. So that's a whole different type of data, whole different type of analysis. I don't look at other observations. I just have one observation, but one student, but track it over time. Or, like we mentioned earlier, we track our weight over time. Okay, this month I weigh 110 pounds. Next month I become 112. Next month become 115. Now I'm on a diet. Then I drop back to 103. 110, right? So we can track all that over time. That's time series data. Just look at one observation, but over time. I mean, you do that for people, and you can do that for a country. What's the inflation in this country? You track it in quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4, right? Just one country, but the inflation rate. Or GDP growth over a year. What's GDP growth back in 2015? What was that in 2016, in 2017, 18, right? You track one observation at different time points. And from there, you can get a good understanding of what happened in the past. And now, very importantly, we can identify the trend over time and using the trend to predict the future. So if I keep tracking the student's performance, right? If student 1 keeps getting somewhere between like 6 and 7 here, like 65, 68, 69, 63, 66, right? Like in all the homework. And then I can predict, well, probably next time he will get somewhere around 65. Right? So I look at the trend and I can predict what this student is going to get the next time. I mean, unless anything dramatic happens. Or if another student show a whole different trend, if the other students start with 85, then 86, 89, 87, 89, 90, 91, 93, 90, 91, right? If another student show this trend, like increasing from like 85-ish over 90 and still like going up, now see, okay, maybe next time this student will get a 93 or 94 if it's going up, right? Or temperature, right? It's been like 85, 86, then 88, then 90, 94, and then 98. Today is like 99 or something. Like, okay, it's trending up. So we have a sense of what happened in the past, and then we can predict the future with some confidence. So that's the use of time series data and why we want to track things over time. A typical presentation of time series data is we have the time dimension in the horizontal axis, and we have the value on the vertical axis. So for example, horizontal axis will be week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5. And then vertical axis will be what the student gets, right? Like 85, 86, 89, 90, right? So that's on the vertical axis. So just make sure we understand the difference between cross-sectional versus time series data. Cross-sectional data is taken at one time point, but across different observations, right? All the students or different cities, different countries, different companies, versus time series data is about one observation, right? One student, one company, one city over time, right? Maybe on weekly basis or monthly basis or annual basis, but that's a different time point. So those are two types of data I want you to understand. So any questions so far? Are we good? Good, okay, nice. I see thumbs up. Thanks, Brenda. Nice, thanks, Victoria. Thank you. Okay. I mean, those are the most important topics. From here, like I said earlier, not very practical for this class, simply because we don't do that for Tom 3020, but it will be practical for you when you go to your job or when you go to more advanced classes doing your project. So when you do your project and conduct statistical analysis, like we mentioned earlier, step 1 is to collect the data. So where do you get your data? We did practice collecting data ourselves earlier in the class, so you can do that. Or you go to existing sources, maybe internal record. So if you work in human resources, you will have employee records, right? On their name, address, their social security number, their job title, years they joined the company, the department they work at, right? Their supervisor's name, all that. You get employee record data. If you work in sales department, right, you got your data recording like the product, the product code, sales volume over like different weeks, sales volume by region, right? That's your data. If you work in customer service, you will get customer profile about their age, gender, income, household size, where do they live, what are their preferences, right? And how often do you buy the product? So you got, there's a lot you can use just from the internal record. I mean, depending on which department you are and what data you can access. Or you can also utilize external data. These are free data source. You can just go to like a census or Bureau of Labor Statistics and download the Excel file. It doesn't cost you anything, and you got the data. You can analyze the data. So I'm just pointing you to some data source that you can make good use of. When you do your own data collection, yeah, you can do survey, you could do experiments, which is slightly more complicated. You read more details of what you can and cannot do in experiment. But all that just serves as a data source. You need to get the data for you to do your research. And when you do the research, here are the general steps. So again, we don't do that for this class, but in more advanced classes, or when you do projects for your company or anything at work, these are the general steps you take. You first define the problem, right? You first define what are you interested in knowing. Am I interested in my students' performance in TOM 3020, or am I interested in all CBA students' performance in TOM 3020, or am I interested in students' mental health during COVID? Like, first decide what you want to research about, and then that will decide what type of data you need. Like, if I care about students' academic performance, I will need to look at their academic record, their score. But if I want to study their mental health, I will need to survey them. And then then that will determine how to get the data. A score can be found from Canvas or like a registrar's office. But again, survey, I need to collect that data myself. Then I need to, choose the sample. Do I ask my own students or CBA students? Should I ask my professor friend to also survey his class? There's a bunch of ways to explore how to collect the data. Once all that's planned and determined, then execute, but actually collect the data and analyze the data. Again, we're going to spend the whole semester to learn how to analyze the data and draw conclusion and report finding. And then finally, like I always say, go back to the real world context, make decisions based on what you find in your research. And maybe the decision is that, students are struggling during COVID, students are very stressed. Maybe we should host some workshop to help students feel better, feel more confident, less stressed. Or maybe we should add more tutors to provide more service to help students succeed in their class so they're not stressed about their academic performance. Or maybe we need to host more like a career session, so resume writing session, career coaching to help students be more confident about finding jobs, right? Based on what we find in our research, we decide what to do. So that's always the key. Make the best use of statistics, make better decisions with the support of statistical tools. So That's all we have in chapter 1. I mean, it's not highly technical, mostly high-level concepts. Just need to understand what's the statistic, different classification of data, high level, where can you get your data, how do you do resource. Those are the most important topics. Some other less important, less practical topic, like I said, you can easily read from the textbook, and I won't heavily test you on those. Homework is already on Canvas, right? You can go to module 2, find homework 1, and it starts easy. It's all multiple choice. Let me see. Oh yeah, sure, no problem, Jason. Thank you. Anyway, we're ending the class. So just all the logistics. Make sure you get your homework, submit your homework before the deadline. So deadline is Friday midnight. But like I said, please do your homework sooner than later. Don't leave it to the last minute. And also, please read the textbook just to enhance your own knowledge level. Everything makes sense to you during class, but you are likely to forget after class a few days later. So to prevent that from happening, you just enhance your knowledge level by reading the lecture note one more time and reading the textbook one more time. It's not going to cost you too much time, but you are going to get good grade in your homework if you do that. So that's my recommendation. And finally, next week is the Labor Day weekend. So we don't have class meeting next week. So go enjoy Labor Day with your family, friends. Make sure you submit homework before that. And then when we come back, we will talk about, I believe, chapter 3. So read the textbook before next class meeting. And then I will see you in 2 weeks. Reading chapter 1 as a review for today's material. And then read chapter 3 to prepare for the next lecture. Yeah. Okay, perfect. If we don't have questions, then have a nice weekend. Do homework on time, please submit before the deadline, and I will see you in 2 weeks. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good weekend and good holiday.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend. Enjoy the holiday. Bye.